Thanks for coming on, James.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on.
Long time coming.
Yeah, I know, been in touch a long time, but yeah, nice to finally be on recording a conversation rather than just having one, I suppose.
Yeah, no pressure.
Yeah.
To the masses, who are you and what do you do? All that kind of stuff. Have you kind of nailed your pitch yet? Or not?
Oh no, I'm terrible at that. But yeah, okay. So I'm James Wood. I sort of I hate saying I own or run, but yeah, run Studio Wood, a sort of small industrial design agency down in Bournemouth.
Nailed it.
I feel like other people can do your intros better than yourself. I find it terrible, but yeah.
Fair enough. And how are you getting on anyway?
Yeah, good. Yeah, pretty good, I'd say. How about yourself?
Oh, I can't complain.
Yeah.
Apart from universities, but I don't want to get myself into trouble today.
Right, yeah. I'll steer clear.
I don't want to get myself cancelled on my own podcast win. But
you be the Gary Lineker of the design world.
Well, solidarity and all that, as long as there's no Matt Letizier's out there, I should be fine. These references are going way over some people's heads. I should move on pretty quick. How are you getting on, Win? You doing okay?
Yeah, very good. Very good, thank you. Yeah. I can't believe it's my dad's birthday tomorrow, and I can't believe it's the 14th of March, and I also can't believe I haven't got him a birthday present yet. So he looks very similar to me, but like 40 years or 30 years older. So I just kind of, when I typically just go to Marks and Spencer's and buy something that I think, I'd wear that when I was 70. So that's why. And then he kind of goes, oh, yeah, I feel fairly fashionable because my younger son has bought me some clothes, and then he wears it lots. So yeah, I'll be darting to Marks and Spencer's after work tomorrow to get him something. But yeah, I can't believe it's middle of March already. Racing
yeah,
by.
That's quite mind blowing, to be honest. Yeah,
it's
flying by.
Yeah, your year going so far so well, and sometimes people can be a bit
good.
negative, can't they, James?
No, I think it's a weird. I feel it's a weird irony because I feel I personal life's been quite tricky the last few years, but this year's felt like a bit of a fresh start for me for a number of reasons. But then and also business is pretty good, pretty positive. But there's a outward feeling that I understand it's tricky elsewhere, so I'm a bit hesitant, but yeah, I can't complain. Just internally, everything feels quite good right now.
Cool. How many have you got there now? 3, 4?
It's like 5 of us full time and 2 kind of freelancers that are ongoing at the moment. We'll probably be sending you an ad to put out next week, actually. So yeah, kind of looking to kind of become 6 and freelance because we're kind of like leaning on freelance a bit heavy at the moment.
Yeah, is that one of those where like as it gets a little bit bigger, you kind of reach a bit of a ceiling where you go 6? That's a nice number, or do you always want that extra body?
I feel like that was always the plan. I always had this idea in my head. I'd love to have been about 6 to 8, just because I still don't want to be. I like the team dynamic you can have when you're slightly smaller, but we're kind of at a point where we kind of need to grow for the business to be sustainable, if that makes sense. Essentially, that's such a good relationship with Chili's that we kind of want to take that model and see where it can work elsewhere, because it's just so fruitful on all sides, and everyone enjoys it. It's just a great dynamic, and yeah, we just want to see if we can do that elsewhere.
Yeah, it's sometimes when you have that good relationship with a client, you kind of want to protect it to a certain degree because you don't necessarily have it elsewhere, and it just as soon as they come, it's quite tricky to necessarily find something else to replicate that, right?
Yeah,
so you always want to make the most of the opportunity that's put in front of you.
The time as it is, which we are, and I'm a big believer in sort of what you do in the present leads to what you do in the future. So if you're sort of laying down a foundation that makes sense for you now, then yeah, see where it goes.
Yeah, cool. And what about life before Studio Wood, just in case people know you as Studio Wood? What was life like before?
Work-wise, so
yeah.
So the reason Studio Wood is because in 2013 I had to freelance very quickly over a weekend and needed to set up a business and didn't get too inventive on a name or anything because it wasn't just intended for me to freelance. And I freelanced in London for 6 years. Well, I moved back here, took on my first employee in 2019. So it was like a 6-year stint where it was just me and sort of potentially other freelancers on jobs. So, and then since taking people on, I floated the idea of changing the name. Now we're growing as a team, but everyone quite likes the name. So it's kind of just stuck as it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough. Cool.
Well, what do you think? Actually, let's put that to you guys. I mean, I float the idea of just calling it wood because it feels less linked to me as a person and the connotations of the material. But I don't know if that just rolls off the tongue wrong. So what do you guys think?
I'm not good at names. What's the how much is the domain name? Is my cost?
Oh, too
Is
much.
my
Yeah, it wouldn't be. Yeah.
That's why it's called Design Truth. Is because the domain name was 90p or something like that. You know, there's no kind of
It's all
branding
lies.
behind
Let's
it.
get to the truth.
All right,
Yeah,
I'll stick with a long one then. Cost effective.
Yeah, we spent all that money on that branding win, but that's the truth, right? It's just like, it's just the domain name was cheap. It was nothing.
Branding's looking lovely though. It's looking very good.
Yeah, thank you very much. And you were the people that you were the person that put us in touch with
Yeah,
our branding
John's
people.
yeah,
so,
John and his team, they're good bunch. Yeah,
so
this is nice stuff.
if you like our branding, or if you don't like our branding, then James's mate John is the person that did it. So
Well, and
John
and the team
and the
give them
team
credit as
and
well,
Lisa. Yeah, should
Lisa
give
did
them
a
all,
great job.
all a bit of credit.
Yeah.
So we're here today to talk a little bit about the working class. As
Yeah.
like a general kind of general theme, and I suppose it kind of just comes naturally, just because. Well, I just think the internship pledge has probably been around for a year or so now, maybe a bit longer. I know you
a
said
bit longer,
like probably a bit longer. I know you just said like it's March, but I'm trying to think when we did that pledge. Obviously, when you went to that school in Wembley, that must have been some time ago. To be honest,
July, August time. Yeah,
yeah, it goes by quite quickly. So it's just nice to kind of bring that back up as a discussion, and just talk about it in a bit more depth, I guess, over the next kind of hour or so. James, just for you to kind of kickstart things off, it's just for people listening, and obviously people listening from all over the world, I guess, which sounds a bit strange. But for you, what is the definition of working class, and does that change from person to person and how they perhaps define that?
Yeah, it's kind of like a weirdly difficult and fascinating thing to define because even sociologists can't agree clear definitions. I mean, technically, and it seems to keep evolving over time. So the prior definition used to be like if you sort of could be put onto the free school meal scheme, and you were sort of, that's how it was defined in demographics. That's sort of changed since then, and you now, I think the latest one is what your parents did or what occupation they're in when you're 14 years old. Some people look at if you've lived in social housing, but again, if you have come down from a higher social position, you might own an asset or a house, but still live in quite a poor condition. So it's really tricky to define. And then even when you age, it's like I wouldn't define myself as working class now, but I have a working class origin. So it's something that isn't so fixed, and it's not fixed with time. So it is tricky. I personally, I feel you can just find out from talking to someone their experiences. I think a really good indicator actually is being of not anyone in the family not being at university level of education or even to college level. Like all my sort of stepbrothers and sisters finished school at 16. I was kind of looking to be pushed out of the house at that sort of age. It was abnormal to go to uni. My parents told me not to go to uni. So there's nothing normal about education. I think that, but at the same time, I've spoken to people who grew up and they have really supportive environments, and I think there's a real difference with that as well. So it's essentially the answer is just like super nuanced. It's really difficult, but you kind of have to do what you can. But ultimately, people from that lower social origin do need support, and it's a tricky thing to solve. Yeah, how you allow them to get up the ladder.
Yeah. What about yourself, Will?
I was listening to I was listening to a comedian last night actually, and he said that he was really, really rich now, but he identifies as poor because that's where he's from, and he spends his money ridiculously in different things, but that's his background, and I very much kind of totally agree with what James has just said. I think it's changed definitions, and I think likewise. It's weird if you call yourself middle class. Does it make you really boring, or I don't know, unambitious or something? Well, I don't know. But I think it's I guess the working class hero and John Lennon and all those types of things where people feel like they're coming in terms of I don't know, working against the system or to try to do something where they've tried to feel heroic in some kind of way to get out of a certain situation. But likewise, I mean, I would say I've had a very, very lucky family life, and but you know, my dad and my mum have come from kind of working class backgrounds, and they had working class jobs in terms of what I was doing when I was 14. So yeah, it's interesting kind of a topic, and I think it's more rather than maybe having a label. I think it's more understanding, like you say, the kind of understanding of what were those, going behind that label, or to try and understand how were you affected. And I think that's probably the content of today's podcast, I guess.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why we started the pledge in the first place, right? Just over a year ago was the idea of, how do we make design or industrial design, sorry, an industry where more people can enter it or have access to pursuing it as a career. That was the kind of the root cause of doing it. Some businesses have changed their internship policies off the back of it, which is nice. Some of them had to be publicly dragged to do it, but we did it, and that's something that we're prepared to do. But kind of looking at your own internship, it kind of experiences, I guess. I appreciate it may have been slightly different, but what do you think are the barriers, I guess, to if we presume there is an issue here in terms of perhaps the lack of diversity within design, what are the barriers from someone from from the working class or perhaps a not so wealthy background entering the profession? So,
but I think because like the work with the internship pledge and that just being widely known as an issue in the creative sector, it's probably the experience now. I'd assume and hope is better than sort of
what
10
you went through
or so years ago when I went through it. But I mean, when I went through it, it was like being at uni. Anyone I knew sort of in the summer breaks who got an internship, I mean, it was unpaid for starters. It was kind of based on the ability that you first could work unpaid, maybe live locally. So I joined. I needed to work through this. I worked in a call center all the summers through uni to make money for the semester, so I didn't have to work while I was at uni. That was the mindset I took. So I think you're shut off in that degree. And then I think, even beyond that, I think it's quite good in the UK. We have the sort of sandwich system. If you do a sandwich degrees, I think that's normalised almost as a job that often is paid. Often it is low, but it's very hard to have someone work for very, very low pay for a year. But I mean, you'll probably know more about that than me, Brad. But I found the shorter stint ones, the month, like 3-6 months at a time, that's where the real issue was. So me, like I'd go to interviews and find out they were unpaid at the interview, and I'd pay to go to London and sort of just be like, well, I can't do it. I don't know anyone who lives here. I can't afford I don't have inheritance. I have no money. I have no savings. So I think there are certain doors just shut on where you could even get in. And I think the hardest step for any student is that first step into the industry. And I think that's why the internship pledge is so needed, I think. And also the knock on from that is that once you pay interns properly, they're kind of nipping at the heels of a junior salary. Everyone gets pushed up. I think it helps salaries in general across the board. So yeah, I only see it as a positive thing if there's more uptake.
Yeah, you're right, I guess. And as we've probably spoken about this more privately than publicly, but quite often, an intern is often probably the biggest kind of. I don't want to kind of put a bracket on someone, but in terms of profitability, an intern is probably right up there. Over a 12-month cycle, it's like the 6-6 split, right? Where for the first 6 months, they probably don't make you a huge amount of profit as a business owner in terms of the time that goes in, but actually over that 12-month period, the quality of work that comes out from students these days, they're still going to be charged at the same rate as everyone else. So they should be paid. According to that, right?
Anyone, you're going to create some sort of value, even if it's the energy they bring, which can be massive as well. I think just having that freshness and energy for the industry, being new, hunting around, being hyper aware of sort of everything that's current. There's real value to that as well. I think.
Yeah, because you've got interns I guess, at PDD and or have done in the past.
Yeah. Just they do bring a lot of different perspectives. I mean, even just this week chatting about AI, it's there's it seems like the younger people, especially the ones who are heading back to their final years soon, they've got an interesting perspective on all of this. So it's I say it's new learning that maybe us with more grey hairs aren't maybe as fresh to.
Yeah. Can you remember your internship, Win?
I didn't do one.
Didn't do one.
No, I did 3 years straight. But likewise, I think, living in regional North Wales, Design Reality was a startup consultancy. There was 15 minutes drive from mum and dad. So the convenience of all of those things were there in terms of locality, but also, they were a startup, they were struggling to pay. So it was kind of minimum wage and that's what it was. So it was, I mean, that was kind of a very convenient approach. But I think, if I'd have come down here to London, it would have been
no chance.
It would have been a struggle.
Yeah, I remember so I had the door closed on plenty of occasions. I remember one, it was really interesting, I won't say, but I had one interview where the guy definitely thought I'd come from a very privileged place, kind of mocked me for it, which was kind of odd, because I don't want to get into it, but it was obviously the complete opposite. Had one where I'd sent an interview, again, it's this travel, the cost was going to London. This was quite a big company as well, had messed up and sort of put it on the desk of someone in the packaging team's desk. So I ended up going there thinking I was going for a product design internship job, but then went and it turned out it was for packaging. I hadn't been informed. And I did end up, I had 2 placements. I think one, I did a year at Nokia, which was brilliant in my sandwich year. And then I wanted to sort of get something for the summer after to get more experience. And I wanted to try and get something paid. So that's when I had the bounce back of not being paid. And I ended up I did 3 months at Coventa, which I don't think exists anymore. But I remember being in the interview for that, and then you just know you're approaching that. Everything's going on. You're approaching that question where you have to ask if it's paid. And I just remember feeling like, God, if they say no, I'm fucked. And I just remember just asking, and I can't remember the exact answer he gave, but he was just, I think he said, "Of course we fucking pay," or something so opposite to what you expected. That it was just such a relief when he said it, because I just knew, and then I sort of was in. But then after uni, I did struggle there, and I did end up getting a placement abroad, which was unpaid, but said I'd stay above the studio. It was described as. It's actually a quote on the thing, isn't it? And it turned out it was a mezzanine balcony in the studio. So I basically slept in the studio, had sort of breakfast and lunch provided, and I think I basically got by for 3 months off the bottom of my overdraft from uni, extended that out to the max. But yeah, it's just, again, we talked about it the other day. I think that's a bit of a normalization that
is that a cultural difference?
Yeah, it's in a society where it's just far more even. You probably haven't got people from that background applying. So I think you're going to have differences of social dynamics in different countries, which again is tricky when design is so diverse and you want that different approach. But I mean, Brexit doesn't help now, because it probably would be much trickier to go work abroad. So it's back when unfortunately you could sort of bridge across into the EU a bit easier.
So the main barrier is cost, effectively. You'd say is kind of getting that internship or whatever. And appreciate obviously when you didn't get an internship, but still managed to have a very good kind of career. But would you say in these days an internship is more of an essential to getting that career up and running, or is it not so much of an essential?
So now.
Yeah.
I think there's I think when I look at some of the universities and the output, it's very sometimes quite hard to pick out a student who's different from another because of the projects they've run and the types of briefs that are there. So I think for someone to stand out, in particular when looking for that first job, I think you're often looking at that part of the portfolio which shows you their internship experience as a point of difference. That's probably be my take from it, really.
James, anything from you? Or?
Yeah, I just think it's just that first step in the door, isn't it? I think a job is such a I think it's that test. It shows someone sort of being tested in the working environment, and there's potentially a reference there. It is quite it's beneficial on all sides. It's just obviously only beneficial if it's paid on all sides. But yeah, I think it's very tricky, particularly if you've probably just done an undergraduate, to just walk straight in. I think a master's might be different, but at the time during I told the debt I'd got in and where I'd come from, I was like, I can't get in more debt. A master's is completely out of the question. And reaching out and talking to other people in similar positions, they say the same thing. It's kind of all in. I don't think I could have gone in any harder on the degree because I was so determined to get a job off the back of it, but still needed to lean on internships to get in the door. Yeah,
and a university education in the first place is also a cost, right? Even if I think about myself, I didn't actually go to university, and the reason why I couldn't go to university is because I needed to get a job to help pay for the mortgage. The mortgage.
It's actually, I don't know if you ever noticed that every job we put out, I always put the university qualification under nice to have, because I really want the data covered. I see sort of education expanding outside of like the sort of standard infrastructures, that someone's gone, do you know what? I don't want to get in that much debt. I've pulled a loan. I've worked on the side, and I've self-educated myself for 2 years, and this is where my portfolio is at. I don't want someone to look at. I think we can look at job specs very literally and see that it requires. It's so normal to put it's required, but I think people probably should put it under required, because I think you might be off-putting people that maybe try and take alternate routes. And I know plenty of graphic designers that haven't gone to uni. But it's weird in our industry. It's so normalized that you have to have had a degree, which probably shouldn't be that normalized potentially.
Why do you think that is?
I just think people don't probably think about it. I think they just probably copy and paste specs, and there's no depth in the thought about what that could be doing.
Yeah, because it's also copy and pasting people as well to a certain degree.
Exactly.
We put a lot of effort into. Mate, if you ever turn up to a design event or you get invited to an event, they're pretty diverse places to be into the people you kind of interact with and things. But most of the time you walk around a studio or just start talking to people. A lot of the people are quite similar, aren't they, in industrial design? Right? Not in a negative way. I don't want to attack anyone, but they're just quite it's almost like a robot to a certain degree.
There's a persona deep there. Yeah, I mean again, that's something I felt trapped to. I think I've listened to it. I think particularly moving to London, I think I shifted who I was to, and I kind of became and fitted that person that like you talk about. And I think since moving back to Bournemouth and being slightly more separate from that,
did you start wearing black t-shirts?
Yeah, I mean, still, something's hard to kill, but it's I don't know. I think it's finding an identity outside of that links to my past more. That's the kind of journey I'm on at the moment. Like, rather than just going from what I was to something new that exists, it's like what's the hybrid? I feel like it's the kind of where I'm at the moment.
Yeah, and just kind of taking that a little bit further. Why do you think class isn't necessarily mentioned as part of the wider diversity discussion? Why are we so?
Very few people have worked their way up in our industry in a position to talk about it or care about it or understand it, for one, and two, it's invisible. So I think I don't know how true this is. I just have a sort of belief that we've been going through, like rightfully going through a sort of balance of visual sort of identity and imbalance in the workplace. And I think now we're shifting to sort of understand what are the invisible differences. And class is one of those invisible differences. So hopefully it will be more on the agenda in the future, but we'll see.
Because it's like some of those conversations, isn't it? Like, I think in my last role before PDD at Entia, I think pretty much every time we had a new member join the team, a multidisciplinary team, it was trying to understand. I have a massively diverse company, but it was also trying to understand behaviourally what people were like. And I think having those time to understand what people's backgrounds are, to understand, what's going on in their mind just before they even approach a job, approach a task. These are the things that are potential hurdles that they're thinking about, or anxieties that they have, and being able to share them things. I think, I think you bang on there in terms of making invisibility visible.
Because we could talk a lot about like I know you would say like a good designer is an empathetic designer, for example. Like that's a trait that you would label upon a designer as someone that's got empathy. But if everyone's from the same system to a certain degree in terms of
I suppose it's the difference. If you think of a team, it's the difference between empathy and sympathy. You can empathize if you've experienced something and you understand it, but you can only sympathize if you don't understand. So we've probably got teams that are empathetic but can only sympathize about certain things. So the more dynamic your team, the more collective empathy I think you have, which is definitely something to aim for the best sort of output.
Yeah, and is that one of the reasons why there should be that encouragement to branch out and to bring in more, different perspectives? Because we could be having this discussion, but other people might go, well, is it really a problem? What's the problem with it? So what is the actual problem with a lack of diversity within the industry?
I suppose you could take a step back and go like, it's a problem in the industry, but it's also a problem in society. Yeah. So it's like, it's worse in our industry than in wider society, which I think is why it's probably quite important. But in wider society, I mean, there's so much data on sort of like how stretched that is and how unequal it is, having sort of so many negative implications on so many levels. And I think the UK is one of the worst scoring countries in sort of the developed world on social mobility, if not the worst. So it's a real topic at the moment. And it's also, as forms of diversity go, it's declining. Like it's getting worse, and in our sector it's getting worse if you look at data on it. So it's quite important it probably becomes talked about, because it's one of the only forms of diversity that's getting worse, not better.
Yeah. And is one of the reasons why it's getting worse is just the state of play of our education system as a
I feel like it's wider in terms of just the polar ends of wealth expanding, and on, like you say, you're getting financially stripped out on the education side here. Doing the fees of universities are just and I read a quote once about like, if you're at the bottom rung of the ladder now, it's like you look up and you see how fucking far you've got to go, and it's easier to step off than to even keep going. I think that's the sort of metaphor of where we're at right now. Is it's just the ceiling's getting very, very high, and it should be getting lower. That's the societal problem we've got. And I suppose it's then within our industry, what do we put in place to support that? But like I said, I suppose it depends if you care or think that it makes a difference that someone from that background has value. But then I suppose, is it less about value and more about fairness? Like, why should some people have access and some people not? I imagine most of us would want a society to be fair. So it's really about fairness and balance, maybe more than anything, I guess.
Yeah, and the solutions in or potential solutions on how we can address this as an industry, is it something where you kind of have to rely on those wider societal changes, or is it something that we can do internally as an industry to make a dent on things, or is it one of those things where unfortunately there are loads of things that are out of our control?
I think it's probably a bit of both. I mean, obviously, during like the internship, I think is a great example of something positive in the industry. I think other things are like, if you're going to go and support schools, I think prioritize, if you can, probably state schools outside of London, sort of financially are worse off than inside. Obviously, look at state schools, not private, if you can, because they're sort of getting completely stripped. Consider classes in the hiring process, which again we touched on a little. I don't think that's really done. I think it's very much on a visual diversity point of view, but I think, and it's a tricky balance, because at the same time, I mean, you are much less likely to get into the creative sector if you're, say, female and working class than male and working class. So it's tricky. But then at the same time, if you're female and privileged, you're way more likely to than male and working class. So there's a depth to it that I think it's worth people just considering a little bit and putting a little bit of thought to when it comes to taking people on.
And obviously, when you went to the school in Wembley, I guess that's like effectively a low cost solution, right? I mean,
I think you've when we talked about it about a year ago before even going, I think if everyone was to do a little bit, almost like a bit of responsibility of being a designer, in the industry. And again, even if you are someone who's maybe come from a privileged background, I think it's still important to try and connect with schools and make awareness. I think, obviously sometimes if you don't speak the same or you don't maybe behave the same, it's different, or look the same, it's different. But I think, I think more than anything, we need to just encourage people of all those different backgrounds, but in particular backgrounds in working class areas, to understand that design is an achievable career. And then I think, rather than just being a one trick pony kind of effort of going into a school, I think then it needs to be a kind of a logical pathway, or helping them understand what the pathway is. And I think that's the tricky bit at the moment, right? I think it's if there's almost like a minimum requirement of having a university degree, and arguably, I think there used to be 90 product design courses. I think they've slimmed down a bit now, but there used to be 90 in this country alone. So if there are kind of those top universities who are pretty much taking students only from private schools, it's already a problem to be able to access that situation. And I think we all believe in a kind of a meritocracy, but I think it's how is that actually happening? We don't understand how those university entry maybe are, I don't know if they've got, dare I say, quotas or how they facilitate them. But I think it's important that the students know, even if we're talking to 12, 13-year-olds, that they can understand there is maybe a local technical college, there's another pathway that's non-university or apprenticeship wise, that they can still get to that same place.
I personally think apprenticeships could be huge, but it's just something I thought about. I just like, how do you develop them? And they'd have to be very structured. But I think for me, that the critical age, I feel like, is sort of around 15, where you could drop out of school at 16. You kind of want, again, give that, like exactly what you said, give that perspective that's achievable. Because again, there's like, you think of the relations around someone from that background, like no one's university educated, no one's working in a creative job. It's like the perception of a creative job. Well, first of all, it's not even possible. It's a hobby. Like it's not. It's so unachievable. I think that's why I ended up going to uni as a mature student. I was kind of discovered industrial design when I was 21. I never was going to find it any younger than that. So it's just how do you find those talented students that have real potential at the right age? But I think apprenticeships could be massive, but it's quite an ordeal to potentially pioneer something like that.
It's interesting though, isn't it? I mean, we chatted about it like years ago at Design Reality, thinking, could we do an educational stream? Because people were questioning, I think it was planned that these $9,000 a year fees were going to be, what if we had 10 students here and they were paying $5,000 each or something, kind of going, could you, is it? But I think the problem being is, and it's a lot of these kind of questions around the influx of AI and use of AI and people cheating to get grades, is that we're essentially valuing that grade or that degree certificate rather than the learning. And I think that if someone could show evidence of a learning program, I know the guys at Advanced Design, the offsite program in the States, are trying this, but if someone could show that in a non-university and that it's, I don't know, accredited by Design Truth or whatever, however it would happen, but something like along those lines is probably the way to open those floodgates, because I think that then it's something where it's trustworthy, the industry knows what the caliber of the students are like, and then I think I totally agree with you, it could be massive, because God help us if we ever get to like the American situation of like £100,000 student loan, and you can see us kind of maybe heading there, and it's kind of going. But so I think that is the crux of it. It'd be interesting to see if someone could actually develop something.
Yeah, I remember we applied for some funding, didn't we? We kind of that chap that got in touch, and we applied for some funding with Innovate UK, didn't we? About going to some schools and they turned it down. So it is even just from a general funding angle of like, well, here's a proof of concept of going to the school. Can we scale it up, and can we get some funding to help do that? And the answer was no. So Yeah, how important actually is it in the eyes of others? You know.
I think it's still lacking that momentum, as that wider momentum in a sense.
It's also showing that desire, right? I think like I've been inundated with different portfolios and looking through the CVs in particular lately. The students that aren't even doing design technology at A level, who, and I know people have got slightly different perspectives, but are going to top universities, but they've done no design technology up until university. So the degree courses are picking students without that design background, design interest, and that's pretty interesting for me. Like there used to be, I'm still not sure if it's still the case now, where it was kind of you get interviewed at university, one of your choices by portfolio, and you had to take in your GCSE work or your, where you were at in your A level progress to show. And I remember being at Salford and getting grilled by this university, and I just really wasn't prepared for it. But it was, but there's a thing there of kind of going, well, if you're just doing 3 random A levels, and what about the person somewhere who's got a real interest and a real burning desire to be a designer, but hasn't been able to get through there? I think it's, that situation I think is a bit confusing.
Yeah, I think I mean, that's kind of like where I came in. Like I got like a C. I did 2 A levels and got like a C and a D or something ridiculously bad. Like I was not with it. During that time of my life. So I remember going. I think I probably got in because I ticked the mature student quota box more than anything, because I didn't have anywhere near the UCAS points, and I don't think I would have got into any sort of top program. I got into the sort of sub product design course at Bournemouth because it was local and I could live at home, pay less rent, and I don't think I would have got any sort of flagship product design courses with that background.
Which just shows, right? If you can still have people that have good careers in the profession that don't necessarily follow the tick box exercise.
If you've had that sort of background as well, it's like there's a strong chance you haven't been that driven in your youth, or understand or had the experience to
had awareness,
guidance or support to know what you want to do and what you want to be, and that awareness will probably come later. And then I suppose it's unis or institutions being aware and open to that. I mean, I can't say whether they do or don't do that, but in my case, obviously they did, which was quite good.
What was the awareness for you? When did you start thinking about industrial design?
I ended up getting a job in IT at Barclays in a bank. I think it was like an apprenticeship scheme thing to be a programmer. And at the time, I didn't know I was dyslexic, and I was the worst fucking programmer probably ever existed. Found it fascinating, the problem solving side of it, but was terrible. Absolutely terrible. And just literally hated. It's not nice to do something you feel bad at and you don't enjoy every day, like small cog, big machine, sort of no, sort of very lack of empathy sort of institution. I was just like, I just hated it. So it just, this is what I always say to people now, is I had this, I didn't like where I was in my life. So I looked back, because again, I didn't really have anyone around to sort of help me through this. And I just say to people, think or talk to your parents or your guardians, whoever you have when you're younger, and find out the thing that you did when you were like 6, 7, 8 years old that you just do relentlessly without any support, like you're almost obsessive over. And mine were Lego and drawing. So it was like, I had a stepdad at the time who, like, fortunately, it was like, buying my mum's love, showering me with some Lego. So I remember I built like whatever the biggest Lego Technics thing was when I was like 6 or something. I remember no one believed that I did it, but I was obsessive. And I think I would say to people now, if you get stuck and you don't know what you're doing, you're in a job you hate, just find that thing that you could do relentlessly when you're younger, because that's your subconscious coming through. And the problem is when you're thinking rationally, you're thinking too much with the front of your mind that you can't find what you're good at, if that makes sense.
Yeah. When you're nodding.
Yeah. I think I've never heard of that before. I've thought about it that way, but I think you bang on there. I think most people listening to this will probably kind of feel that resonate massively.
I think people find it's a shame, but I think people they look outward rather than inwards. They'll find what other people do and go, I like the look of that. That's what I'm going to do. Or I think it can sometimes be a trap when you do grow up actually in a really comfortable household, because if you really respect your parents, I think a lot of people go, well, they do that and I respect them, so I'm going to do that. And I think you can get caught in that again, whereas you're not kind of truly finding what's your thing, what are you about, which could be completely different to your parents. Yeah.
Well, I think that's where that awareness is, right? I mean, like I think it wasn't for my A-level teacher or before then, obviously, with a little bit end of GCSEs, kind of saying, "Oh, you know, why don't you think about product design after you do A-level with us and go do product design?" Oh, what do you mean? I don't understand. And it certainly wasn't kind of a North Wales profession by any means. So I think that awareness is, I've got friends who've got kids. It's just, having an awareness of any type of, I guess things that you like doing and what those particular kind of jobs may be. Obviously, we want to push industrial design, but it's more the sense of a lot of people just aren't reflecting, like you're saying, James, to understand what they want to do, but sometimes you can get too far down the line. You just end up stuck doing something you really don't like doing.
Yeah, and then you have the fear of. I mean, I even had the fear of leaving, and like I said, I think it was my dad. My dad said, "Don't go to uni. You're in IT. It's a stable job. You'll end up getting paid well." His advice was don't go. So like we like to bring that up now and again for a bit of fun with him. but yeah, again, it's quite hard. Again, you're in a position where like if you're essentially saying fuck you to your parents, which is at like quite a young age, is quite a hard thing to do. Like equivalent, like you say, or you get deep in a career you don't enjoy and then having to pivot on that is also hard to do. I met a guy, I went to the Bournemouth uni the other night to help with a evening thing. There's a guy who was like 37 who sort of worked in sales, who's now in design. He was so passionate, and I was like, so much respect for him sort of making that pivot at that age and finding something he had so much passion for. But it's that drive that will push him through. I had the same drive as I can't fail because I can't go back to that job I hate. It's weird. Drive is another one. I think that relates to sort of a negative working class background. I've always had quite a strong drive, and it's a sad thing, but it comes from fear. It comes from fear of like not having enough money, not having like getting on the property ladder, not having a safety net. So you and my brother,
you feel like you're always having to prove yourself to a certain.
Not even prove yourself, just like I think when I was in London, it was like I lived like paycheck to paycheck until I was in my 30s. After we moved back from London, I couldn't afford London. We moved in with my wife. We then got married, moved in with her parents to save for a deposit in our 30s, and it's just like you're living month to month. And I don't think design pays enough. I don't think that's necessarily when you're in a service industry that's kind of dictated by wider sort of economic movements that you can control sometimes, but it is tricky, and I think it's probably quite easy to give up and go, do you know what, I'll go work in sales where I can make 80k a year or something. Do you know what I mean? It's tricky because it's a sacrifice on the journey when you've not got the backing, and especially being freelance for so long, there's always the worry. It's like, John, there's a real chance if this goes tits up or I get really ill, you could be homeless. There's nothing there. There's no savings behind you. There's no, you'd be on a sofa potentially back home if there is one. Like, yeah, it's tricky one. But that it's a good driver, but it's a shame it comes from a
scary place.
Yeah.
For some reason, James, I put something up on our Instagram to say we had you on, and I got a load of questions come through.
Oh yeah.
Some of them are a bit strange. I'll be honest with you.
I know she didn't put the topic of the conversation. They might be quite random, but yeah, go on.
Well, one of them was favorite starter, main course, side dish, dessert, and drink, which I thought was a strange question.
Starter, main. Say again.
If we just go starter, main course, and dessert.
I'm not a dessert person.
Can't see me asking this to Hubert, can you? I can't see me plucking up the courage to ask this to Hubert. Starter, main course, and dessert. What would you go for?
Starter. Do you know what I used to love until it like food poisoned me was soft shell crab, deep fried soft shell crab. I had terrible food poisoning for it once and ended up on a drip. But like, so I haven't gone near it since. But that's a good one.
Okay.
I love noodles. They're my love them. So decent ramen, or when I was in China, just okay. Here's a weird one, little known secret about myself. I don't know if I've told you. I had a nerve condition when I was 11 where like my face got paralyzed, and when the nerves grew back, my the nerve on this side grew back, the one that tells your mouth to salivate when you enjoy food, connected to my eye. So when I eat something I really enjoy, my left eye waters and I can't control it. And it does it the most with noodles and spicy food. So something around there. Love Eastern cuisine. So
so if you see James crying at a design group event, do you know?
Yeah, it's also
you know
it's quite savage, because if someone makes you some food, it's like you can't hide if you enjoy it or not. It's quite blatant on your face whether you have or not. Dessert, I would probably go straight onto a starter or a cheese board or something like that.
Stunning.
And then what was the other one? Or something else?
Well, there was loads. Well, I think we'll just stick with start, main, dessert. We won't go all kind of middle class and start talking about side dishes. Do you know what I mean?
It's quite an irony that if you talk to people I work with or know me, it's like I love food, and it's like my diet and what I enjoy is definitely not working class. It's definitely moved on from frozen kebabs and stuff we used to have at home back in the day.
From your roots. Yeah, sometimes me and Win go for a kebab, don't we, after a drink? You know, we're still connected to that.
Yeah.
To our youth. There was one kind of, I'd say, fairly design related question, so I'll ask that to you as well. What are the top 5 things you wish you did when you were setting up Studio Wood?
Oh, do you know a really interesting one? I always tell people is I didn't work for long enough before I freelanced. I think I got offered a kind of opportunity I couldn't turn down, so I went for it. But I really think it's valuable to work for someone or in an environment that you'd like to set up, say that's a studio, for at least 3 or 4 years before you do it. I think there's so much you can, and I think I went through so much stress having to create a lot of processes and contracts and legal, like from again, no support or anyone to help me or know about that, my network. So, and also at that point, everyone I knew or graduated with were junior. So it's like there was no help anywhere. And I personally say, and also no connections to draw on for work. You couldn't go talk to people, like they were too junior to sort of pull you in from a service point of view. So yeah, weirdly, I would say consider when you set up. So many people are so desperate to set up straight out of uni, and I think it's a bit of a trap personally. But
yeah. Any final words from you, Win?
No, I think this is something that's a topic that's not going away. I think, as James said it, I think this visible, almost or invisible rather, kind of minority maybe that we are, and understanding how people feel about where they've come from and their background and all various behaviours that comes out in. I think it's something we just need to chat more about. I don't think there's a solution. I think it's more just understanding how people feel about these, and I think create awareness and help people understand that they can do it if they've got the drive, like James mentioned, because I think that's the main thing, right? That's the main thing.
And just quickly, just to wrap up, how did you get on with your mentoring thing, James?
Yeah, so I got I've kind of funneled that down to 8 people I had calls with, and I'm now sort of narrowing that down. I was going to try do it to 2 because I've got a lot on as it is. But do you know what's quite sad? I should probably tell you why I posted that. Is it was a real reaction to like I moved back to Bournemouth because I couldn't afford property in London, and then even here we wanted a house big enough that we could have a child in. So I bought there's 2 council estates in Bournemouth. There's one I lived in when I was younger, and then the property I live in now is on the other one. And the reason I did that is a kid who was 14 got stabbed right outside my house the day before I posted that. And it just reminded me during that I was part of that behavior when I was a teenager, sort of that just getting involved in the wrong stuff, the wrong people. And it just reminded, I know it's not going to directly help someone that age, but it's just like, it's a real kick. Like you need to fucking help people who have grown up. Like you can't forget your roots. And it was kind of a reaction to that. But yeah, it's been a great take up, and now I've got the hard choice of trying to narrow it down to 2.
You're taking them all to judges' houses, are you? And you kind of
should do, yeah. Be a nice little holiday out of it. Yeah, we could be the panel. But yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. I'm just trying to find people I think that like sort of need the help the most. I think they need to have the potential, because otherwise it could be tricky. And I think just have that balance with my ideals and potentially connections and just who I can essentially support the most. I think is I've kind of had to filter because there were some chances coming in who didn't come from that background, so it was a bit of a filtering process to work that out. Yeah.
Fair enough. So that's also just to wrap up, just another low cost solution, right? If everyone was to try to mentor someone, or just make a bit more of an active effort, then it's those little things, right? At scale, that's how you make change, right? It doesn't need to be this massive societal shift. It's just if everyone just clubs together and does one little thing.
And I think everyone does care about different things, and there are different forms of diversity. And I think it's just everyone's going to help in their different ways. Also, Hayley supported you on that side of the gender balance recently, and it's like fully let her do that as her thing. I think I just feel obliged to do it because it's my thing, it's how I grew up and it's what I know about. So I think if anyone comes from that place and they manage to get up, just be aware of giving back, I think, for sure.